So good evening and welcome to the African American Workshop and Lecture Series at the University of Oregon. The University of Oregon is located on Kalapuya Ilihi, the traditional indigenous homeland of the Kalapuya people. Following the treaties between 1851 and 1855, Kalapuya people were dispossessed of their indigenous homeland by the United States government and forcibly removed to the Coast Reservation in western Oregon. Today, descendants or citizens of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, Community of Oregon, and the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians of Oregon, and continue to make important contributions to their communities at the University of Oregon and across the land we now refer to as Oregon. We thank you most sincerely for joining us tonight for another presentation of the University of Oregon's African American Workshop and Lecture Series. As you will recall, the series was one of the 12 demands of the Black Student Task Force, and the purpose of the series is to facilitate a better understanding of and appreciation for the vast contributions of Black people that they have made to our country and our world. But it's not only important to learn, we must also act on the information that flows from our illustrious speakers. Given Dr. Hewlin's focus on authenticity and our work on improving the campus climate in our units as well as across the UO campus, her work and presence are especially useful to who we are becoming. In this respect, we are looking forward to benefiting from the many ways that all of us will put her world-class research into tangible action. In addition to welcoming our honored guest, Professor Patricia Hewlin, it is also a treat to welcome all of you. Thank you so much for all that you do and for investing your time and your talent and your experiences in this series. I as well extend a big thank you to the DEI team for the awesome work that they do in making the series possible, and to our partners in psychology, LCB, UO Communications, Black Strategies, Student Life, UO Senate, United Academics, and the Office of the Provost for their support. We're also grateful to the interim president, Patrick Phillips, for his support and support of the Office of the President. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming to the stage Acting Provost Janet Woodruff-Borden to introduce our speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvette. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. As Yvette said, I'm Janet Woodruff-Borden. I'm the Acting Provost and Executive Vice President at the University of Oregon. I have the pleasure and honor this evening of introducing you to our second speaker in this year's African American Workshop and Lecture Series, Dr. Patricia Faison Hewlin. Dr. Hewlin and I had an opportunity to talk earlier today, and I know you are in for a treat this evening as she shares her research and her wisdom with us. Dr. Hewlin is an organizational behavior scholar on the faculty of McGill University. She also serves as their ombudsperson for students there. Professor Hewlin is also a visiting professor at Southwestern University of Finance and Economics in Chengdu, China. Before joining McGill, Dr. Hewlin worked on the faculty of Georgetown University. She was also a vice president and branch manager at Citibank's New York City branch. I'm going to mess up your computer screen in just a second, Patricia. Prior to entering academia, a native New Yorker, Dr. Hewlin holds a bachelor's degree in Spanish and English from Binghamton University, as well as a master's in business administration and finance and a PhD in organizational behavior from NYU's Stern School of Business. Dr. Hewlin's research primarily focuses on factors that facilitate and impede authenticity and authentic self-expression, belonging, and overall well-being in everyday work interactions. Her research interests also include employee responses to perceived organizational value breaches, supplier diversity, and callings in the workplace. Dr. Hewlin's work is published widely in many noted scholarly journals and popular presses, including, among others, the Academy of Management Journal, the Journal of Applied Psychology, Organizational Science, the Harvard Business Review, the Huffington Post, Forbes, and many others. She is a sought-after guest speaker, I think you'll find out why, and consultant for organizations in a range of industries. The title of Dr. Hewlin's talk this evening, Contemporary Challenges with Authenticity in the Workplace, is obviously very timely for us as we now dive into the results of our climate survey, taking action to both understand the nuances and implications of the data and also plan for meaningful action to respond to those findings. Dr. Hewlin has written about how important it is for organizations to build environments where everyone feels psychologically safe to be themselves at work. She notes that psychological safety occurs when employees feel they can take risks and offer diverse points of view. Tonight, Dr. Hewlin will share findings of her research that illustrate how complex work dynamics hinder authenticity, as well as the challenges associated with creating and sustaining organizational environments that promote it. As we continue to make our institution, our classrooms, our labs, and our workspaces more welcoming, and we work to create environments that generate belonging and trust, we very much look forward to hearing you speak tonight. So everyone, please join me in welcoming Dr. Patricia Hewlin.
Thank you for the kind, very kind introduction, Janet. I really appreciate this. And it's really nice to see all of you. I had a chance to meet many of you today. And before I begin, I have to thank Yvette and her team, Vice President Yvette Alex Asenso, and the Division of Diversity and Equity. My goodness, what an amazing team. They have been very assertive to make sure that I was planned for properly, my accommodations, my schedule, and everything. I also have been just very impressed by the sincere interest in improving the way you do things here. And I say the way we do things as academics and as staff members and educational institutions. And so I'm just very appreciative to be here. It is an honor to be here, and I look forward to having a discussion with you. I'm going to share some findings, research, and so on, but I really would like to have a conversation. And if you want, I don't think they planned for this, but if you really have a burning question, go ahead and interrupt me. I'm okay with that. That's what I say to my students. So I don't really like standing behind a podium for the entire time, so I'll be going back and forth. So let's just start with what I see as the agenda today. What I'd like for you to do is learn something, so we're all here to learn something. So you'll learn about some research-based definitions and findings. And this word hearken, I like old-fashioned words sometimes. This is a really old-fashioned word. But what I really like about this word hearken is that it's kind of, like hark, who goes there? It's kind of like, it's about listening and acting. Listening and paying attention. And that's what I really want you to do, not just to hear, but to really think about what's going on. So pay attention to the sparks. Even if those sparks feel a bit uncomfortable. That's the opportunity to ask, well, why am I feeling uncomfortable? I need to have a conversation with myself later. Or perhaps I'll underscore something that you already know. And you'll say, oh, yeah, that's good. Or maybe you were thinking about doing something. Well, hopefully you'll act on it. create an action plan, not only for yourself, but I really want us to think about structure in this conversation today. How do we translate what we are going to talk about into change in structure, policies, procedures, norms, whether they're formal or informal, because that's how we move things. We move things that way. And a lot of conversation has been around the interpersonal component of authenticity and the intrapersonal. Be real, be true, it's all about me, right? But if we're really interested in the inclusion conversation, then it's beyond us. And it's beyond just the two of us, sort of small groups of us. It's really about the overriding community and how things are done. So that's where I am in terms of my research and my stage of what I do. And so a lot of what I'm going to talk about is based upon a really comprehensive review. That's why I took so many authors. Actually, we discovered half of us were interested in reviewing the authenticity research, and so half of us were working on it, and then another half were doing the same thing. And so we met and we said, well, why don't we combine forces? And it turned out to be a very comprehensive review. I think the first part was looking at over 500 articles and just really getting an idea of what's going on in the authenticity arena and where should we go. So I wanted to acknowledge my co-authors in this authenticity piece in the Academy of Management Annals. So let's just have some formal definitions. Authenticity is really about a consistency between our internal experiences and our behavior. So we have a formal definition here: internal sense of self, outward behavior. We see it as a continuum, and so you can have high levels of authenticity, you can have low levels of authenticity. In the research, there are typically two broad arenas where authenticity is about an experience, an internal experience, how I feel regarding the extent to which I'm being true to myself. It's also the externally perceived experience. So as a leader, is the leader authentic? And if the leader is authentic, the leader receives lots of benefits. And when we feel authentic, we have some good benefits as well. Well, I guess that's a double good benefits. We have some benefits: well-being, lower levels of depressive symptoms, work engagement, self-esteem, and more. And when we think about times when we were authentic, if you just take a moment where you can say, you know, I was really being true to myself, you felt pretty good, right? You felt as if you arrived. It's an amazing thing when we can do it. And we're going to talk about when it's difficult to do it as well. So mostly, as mentioned before, the externally perceived is primarily in the arena of authentic leadership, which is an area of research. And the findings around this relates to, as I mentioned before, positive outcomes. Those who report to the leader, work with the leader, tend to trust leaders who are perceived as authentic. The exchanges are positive. They're attracted to the leader's values, and they want to emulate the leader. So again, we could probably all agree that authenticity is good. But at the same time, it can have its challenges. The biggest challenge in authenticity is just that it's not equal. It's just not equal for all. Have you ever been in a situation where you didn't even have to think about whether or not you were being authentic? Hopefully, we all have been in those situations at one moment at a time. But think about being in a classroom, being in a committee meeting, being in the workplace in general, where you're thinking about, should I say this? How do I say it? If I say this, you're going through the process. Then we can say, well, maybe I guess authenticity is not equal for all, because I might have a colleague next to me who's not even thinking about that. Authenticity is not equal for all. And so if we can agree to the fact that authenticity is not equal for all, then inclusion is not equal for all. Because if we can't feel authentic, we're probably not feeling quite included as well. So we're going to dig into this a bit. So I'll stand here so I can read a little bit. Perceptions of and reactions to authenticity are colored by biases and workplace norms that do not benefit everyone. The mandate to bring your whole self to work, bring your whole self to work, is riddled with confusion and, ironically, fosters pressure to conform. So let's unpack this a little bit. Is anyone feeling a spark right now? Which word got you? Bias? Ooh, yeah, right? Riddled with confusion. Well, I figured I'll just be authentic, and maybe you'll invite me back or not, I don't know. But I'm going to be authentic. All right, so let's start here. Perceptions of and reactions to authenticity are colored by biases. What do I mean by that? Well, I had a conversation earlier with some colleagues. First of all, I enjoyed my meetings today, and it was really, really a pleasure meeting you all. We were talking about authenticity, and I was saying that we have our own perceptions of whether or not something is authentic, and whether the way people exude their authenticity is good or not, acceptable or not. And so in one of our conversations, I used my hair as an example. There's a recent study by one of my good friends, Ashley Rosette, and a colleague, and they found in their research that Black women who wore their hair naturally were perceived as less professional and less likely to be hired. So how we perceive authenticity, how we respond to it, can be colored by our biases. We have in our minds what's acceptable in terms of how people express themselves. Oh, they just use their hands so much, it's so distracting. They're so emotional. They're too quiet. They never say anything. We have our own ideas of what authenticity should look like. And so for those whose identities have been traditionally marginalized, it's confusion, because they're told to bring your whole self, but there's so many signals that bringing whole self may not be received favorably. So what do you do? Well, we'll talk about it. So my research came up with these questions based upon a number of interviews. And what's a little, I won't say it's sad, but I'd like to just see some more movement. So I would just say I'm a bit frustrated because these questions were developed back in 2003 as a result of interviews that I had when I was working on my dissertation, everybody. What year are we in? Will I be passed over for a promotion if I show how important my role as a parent is to me? I talk to leaders, people across multiple industries, and depending upon the industry, this is a real question for males and females. Will I be viewed as a radical or deviant if I wear clothing that reflects my religion or my cultural values? Oh, look, they look so cute in wearing their religious garments. That can be very, very condescending. Will I be considered too straight-laced or not savvy enough to handle clients if I don't use profanity or drink alcoholic beverages during after-work engagements? I hear that from a lot of salespeople who may just not like alcohol or may have religious reasons or so on, but it's a question. What would happen if I speak out against new organizational directives that are inconsistent with my views about social justice? That's a very tough question, particularly if you are part of a group that's has historically been marginalized. Because there are a number of studies that have shown that minorities who raise concerns about social justice tend to be received less favorably than those of the majority. And so that's the risk that we're dealing with. I've had people ask me, in my role as ombudsperson, well, actually not ask me, but giving me guidance. Well, be careful, because if you raise concerns about social justice, it may be viewed that you're pushing your own agenda. And I wondered, would they ask my white male counterpart that question? Probably not. And so now I'm thinking, oh gosh, how am I going to phrase this in a way where it does not look like I'm pushing an agenda for myself? And I came to the conclusion that whatever. We get too caught up. We get caught up in these things, and the fact is, people are always going to talk. There's always something to talk about. And that's the journey of authenticity that we all have to engage in. It's not an easy journey, but the courage component is quite important oftentimes. So, facades of conformity. I came up with this concept when I was working on my dissertation because I really wanted to focus on the concept of values and values congruence. And what I mean by values congruence was that I wanted to understand what people do when their values are inconsistent with the overriding values of the organization. And so now I'm not talking about stated values per se, but I'm talking about what's rewarded. What's rewarded tells you what's valued. Who's rewarded tells you who's valued. I've been in cocktail parties when I was in banking, and some senior folks would maybe talk about a certain political persuasion, making the assumption that I was part of that political persuasion. And so even though it was not an organizational value, the top leaders were basically signaling, this is what we believe politically. And so again, when you hold values that are different from the overriding values in terms of what's acceptable, what's rewarded, and what's not, there's a conflict, and what do you do? And so I wanted to understand that. And so I called the concept facades of conformity because it really speaks to a mask, a filter, a cloak that people wear to signal that they are in agreement with the organization and its values, which means suppressing your own values and even pretending to go along in order to fit in, to survive, and succeed. So that's the concept of facades of conformity. And I define it as false representations that people engage in to appear as if they embrace organizational values. It could be a nod of head. It could be attire, what we wear. It could be how we wear our hair. It could be changing our names. It could be changing our accents. It's a code-switching behavior, but it's rooted in a value system where we're compromising and we're really not being true to our values the way we know we should and the way we would want to. But there are organizational as well as individual factors that can play a role on the degree to which we create facades. And so I'm going to just quickly share with you some of my research findings and research findings of others who have studied this concept. I'm going to talk more about non-participative work environments, but these are environments where people are not involved much in the decision-making. When people feel as if they are not involved, they're not included in some of the decisions that are made in the work environment, of course they're not going to feel comfortable really being true to themselves. Self-monitoring, that's, so my psychology folks are here, you know. Yes, so self-monitors are those who basically scan the environment to see, well, what works, what doesn't work, how are people behaving? People who are like that tend to be more inclined to create a facade when their values are in conflict. And then you have collectivism. These are people who are more interested in group harmony. So that would be, but it's interesting with collectivism that I found that when one is a collectivist, they're less likely to experience the emotional exhaustion, the general stress associated with creating facades because group harmony is more important. There was a study regarding job insecurity, abusive supervision, and minority status. We're going to talk about minority status as well. So emotional exhaustion, intentions to quit. Why? It's pretty difficult to maintain this over time. And we find decreased organizational commitment, as well as reduced work engagement. It's stressful when one can't be true to themselves at work. So I often get the question about, well, do you have to be completely true to yourself? Meaning, do you have to show it all? No, you don't have to show it all, but you should have the opportunity to show it all. But if you don't feel like that, and when I mean it all, let's be careful with that as well. We'll talk about that later. We know we are in a work environment, so in terms of the context, we want to be savvy in terms of the context. So we'll get there. And then age, I found in one of our studies that, what do you think? Older or younger workers create more facades? Who said older? Someone said older or younger? Yeah. That's what we found in our research, particularly in job insecure environments. The older workers are more inclined to be authentic. And so I'm actually in the process of writing just a short piece to say that in this age of age discrimination, you actually want the older workers to be more a part of decision-making and getting their feedback, because they're going to be the ones who are more inclined to give you authentic feedback that's needed. Now, I'm not saying young people, those of you who are younger, that you wouldn't do it. It's just that the motivation for younger people is to figure it out. You're figuring things out. You're trying to build your career. And so you may not want to step out and take the risk of giving a divergent point of view, which makes sense. So my research is connected to other research that has looked at what happens to people when they bring their authenticity in the workplace. And so these studies speak to the discrimination that people experience when they exude aspects about their identities in the workplace. Women sometimes trying to hide their pregnancy as long as possible out of concerns of what will happen to them once people know what will happen to their career, and so on. And so these studies are fairly old, but they're still relevant. They're still relevant. I'm sharing the most seminal pieces, but again, I'm in so many conversations with people in a wide range of work environments, and this concept of authenticity continues to emerge. And I believe this is the case is because when we talk about being true to ourselves, when we talk about our values, we're talking about us. It's who we are. And if we can just be reminded of that, then I believe that we would respect each other's sense of dignity a bit more. This is not just this term that we're using, authenticity. I'm actually tired of hearing the term authenticity. I want to talk more about what can we do to help people be authentic. What can we do? So that's really the big question. And we're going to spend, actually this next portion, this is the biggest portion, I think, of this presentation, because we're really going to start talking about some solutions that are based upon research findings, interviews. My methodology of research has primarily been self-reported surveys, interviews, and I've run a couple of experiments, but for the most part, my work is field research. And the majority of the work that I showed you today, that I'm talking about today, connects to my work in North America, US. However, I have spent time in Singapore and China and other places in Asia where I have interviewed managers and executives in general regarding their thoughts related to authenticity and leadership. And so I'm in the process of analyzing that data and just showing a comparison of what can we learn from each other in terms of having a collectivist mindset, as an example, versus an individual mindset when it comes to authenticity. All right, so how can the workplace, and you see I weaved in the classroom since this is an academic environment. The other thing I wanted to note, which I didn't note earlier, is that if you influence someone or something, you are a leader. So I don't want anyone to sit here to think, well, that's for them. I'm just here to listen and to learn. This is for all of us. So if you influence someone or something, this is connected to you. So I'd like for you to think about the different contexts of your life and how this could be relevant. I call these pillars. They're like foundational. So before we can even think about authenticity, we got to really think about these concepts. And I'm sure that for many of you who are in this arena, particularly in diversity, equity, and inclusion, you're probably going to say, yes, that's right. But one thing I can tell you is with the authenticity literature, we haven't really integrated the diversity, equity, and inclusion literature with the authenticity literature. And I think we can push that a little bit more. And I know that there are some up-and-coming scholars who are doing that now in the academy. So we're looking at representation, participation, psychological safety, fairness. It's a cycle. They're connected in many ways. So let's start with participation. How can the workplace and classroom help reduce facades of conformity and increase authenticity? How can we do this? Well, let's just think about the basics. How many of you ever attend meetings here? Okay. What gets airtime? Well, it doesn't get airtime. That's a research project in itself. My colleagues, scholars, gather the data. What's going on in the meetings? What about information? Who gets the information? You know, there's always that one colleague or friend or family member. They seem to get all the information. It's like, how did you know that? And then they have all the details, right? It's like, how? They're in the know. Who's in the know? Should we even have that as a concept in a community? We should all be in the know. Now, I'm not saying that we all need to know what everybody is doing, but if it's relevant to the work and it's directly relevant to your work, and some of us are getting more information than others, that reduces participation. And so my research has shown that non-participative environments influence people to create facades. Mentoring, cultural competence. And that's basically how we respond to each other when we choose to be authentic, and our authenticity might be a little different than what we have ever seen before. And sometimes when we see things that we've never seen before, we resist. We question it. Sometimes we're curious, but oftentimes we question it. I have been in classrooms when I was much younger, and I say that much younger because some of those classes, the students were close to my age. And when I would walk in, I could just see their looks like, yeah, what is she going to teach me? And I remember I would often say, all right, well, I have my PhD, I have an MBA in finance, and just really having to basically to increase my legitimacy, because I knew that I was showing something different. And I would ask, how many of you have ever had a black professor before? Oh, thank you. that was a question for my years before students, but thank you. I'm glad to hear that. And at the time, most of them did not. And then I said, well, how many of you have ever had black friends? And a lot of them didn't. And so then I would say, wow, so then your experience with black people is probably based upon what you've seen on television, or maybe, you know, back then I was saying in those videos, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh. So when you see me walk in the room, what are you thinking? And again, some responses was negativity, and some was curiosity. Most weren't at the time. I get some curiosity now, but it's really, I'm telling you how our biases really can mess us up. There were a group of neighbors that I would run into when I was working on my PhD. And a couple of them would say, how are you doing in school? So I'm doing well. You're working on your master's degree, right? No, it's my PhD. 2 weeks later, how's that master's degree going? it's really interesting how that works. So when we think about participation, when we begin to include people in the participation process, let's be mindful of how we evaluate the participation of others and be more culturally competent. Psychological safety. Many of you have heard this term. What can we do to reduce facades and increase authenticity? Psychological safety is about taking interpersonal risk, meaning that, can I say this divergent point of view? Can I identify when there was an error that happened in my department? Do I feel safe to do that? Do I feel safe enough to say these things and not be concerned about what will happen to me, what will happen to my reputation? This is a pillar. This is one of the pillars of creating an environment for authenticity and reducing facades. And I have some unpublished research that has shown that when people perceive psychological safety and they feel that they can be when they experience psychological safety, they are less likely to create facades. Fairness. And so the other thing I wanted to mention is to think about the classroom environment as well. When it comes to, I just want to go back to participation because I wanted to mention that as professors, we have to be mindful. When I first started teaching, I would find myself engaging with the most vocal students because they were vocal, and I would just engage with them, and we would have our dialogue, but then I realized that there are other students that need some support in terms of even learning how to participate in class. Sometimes it's cultural. I've had some students say, oh gosh, well, my culture being silent is a sign of respect. And so I would often meet with them to say, all right, that's great, but I want you to learn how to engage in the discussion. And so that's really important because we can create an environment unintentionally where students feel excluded and unsafe. So let's just be mindful of that, as well as pronouncing names, remembering names. I have some students who will say, oh, just call me Lucy. And I ask, well, what does your mama call you? And they'll tell me. And I said, well, I can say that. I can learn. And that creates an environment of inclusion. So fairness, pay, promotions, accommodations. If we're accommodating a student, will we accommodate all students in that way? I know this seems so basic, but I've said this before in other audiences. My grandmother would say, baby, if common sense were so common, everybody would have it. And, we could just leave it as that. So if in the workplace, if there's not a consistency in terms of fairness, that is going to play into the degree to which people feel as if they can actually be true. They're valued. No one is going to really give you the feedback that you need if they don't feel valued. And fairness speaks to value. And lastly is representation. Or another word for it, diversity. Yes, I said it. But really, There are studies that will show that it makes a difference when leaders represent those of marginalized communities. I can tell you, I've never had a dean. I'd never had a dean who looked like me. And so I do now. Her name is Dean Yulan Chan. And she started, I don't know if I guess it's 2 years now. And even though I have been in academia for close to 2 decades, there was something about when she took on that role where I just felt like, wow, I can breathe for a minute here. And it wasn't that I was unhappy or anything, making that clear for those of you who are watching at McGill. Love you all. But I can tell you that seeing someone who looked like me made a difference. I had never seen that during my time at the university in the Faculty of Management. So that was a positive thing for me. I was on a virtual call with a company, and they asked me to talk about psychological safety and authenticity. And I had met someone before, it happened to be Native American, and when I saw that he was part of the virtual room, I sent him a chat, and I said, "Great to see you." And he said, "I feel seen just by the fact that you are here. I feel seen. I feel heard." Representation matters. It matters. It matters in intangible and tangible ways. So I'm actually going to stop here because I think this is a great time for us to have a conversation. Did you feel a few sparks? Don't tell me. Don't tell me. I hope some of you did. Okay, tell me no. Listen, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hewlin.
Thank you. So the university in many of our offices and departments and colleges is undergoing a lot of organizational change right now. So not only does it feel like we are at the beginning of something, and therefore this is a good time to put some new practices in place, but there's also a lot of chaos. So could you speak a little bit about how to encourage authenticity in an environment that, one, is just getting off the ground, but also, two, is very just go, 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 and it often feels like we don't have time. I know part of the answer is we make time, but can you talk a little bit about how we do that, some techniques?
Sure. Prioritize. So you're not going to be able to do it all. But you can put them in categories. What are priorities that you can really address today? And it could be just changing one or two things, and it would make a world of difference. So some things are going to take a short period of time, some will be moderate, some will be long-term, and some won't be realistic right now. But I had a meeting with some people earlier, and I said, just pick one policy that you know is not working. Pick a policy. And sometimes we get overwhelmed to say, oh, everything needs to change. Well, pick one. What can you wrap your hands around to move things forward? Small pieces at a time, and then work as a community. Some of us feel as if everything's on their shoulders or their department or their group. You have a community. So I think a lot of time should be spent in terms of who should be doing what as well.
Who's next?
Hi, thank you for speaking.
Sure.
I had a quick question on the pillars and whether you would say that they're equally weighted.
That's a really good question. And I frankly would say that it depends on the context. Because I think that if we let's go back a bit, because it could be, this one. What's the biggest pain point in the given context? Is that we're finding that people are not participating, people are feeling that they can't participate? Is it representation? And I'm hearing someone say, it's everything. And it could be. It could be. And frankly, they are so interconnected that I presented them as 4 different components, but they're so interconnected that if you tackle one, you're probably tackling the others, if not at least 1 or 2 others. So to answer your question, I would say it depends, and my students really hate when I say that because they want to tell me. It's like, no, it really depends. But do something. Don't get caught up on what's more important than the other. Just do something.
Thanks for your presentation.
Sure.
I was curious if part of your review for your publication also included like successes in the workplace and what those looked like.
Sure. And so authentic leadership has been a very, and I would say very prominent arena in terms of leaders exuding authenticity in their work as well as their value system. And of course, as I mentioned before, psychological safety has a negative relationship with creating facades of conformity. And so just those 2 alone can bring some very beneficial results. Anyone else?
Thank you. Really enjoyed the talk. Can you give some examples of how psychological safety can be like tangibly felt or demonstrated?
Sure. Well, first of all, it begins with, and first of all, before I answer that, read Amy Edmondson's work because she is the person. She's a psychological safety scholar, and I'm drawing from her research. One thing is really how we change the way we look at problems. Instead of calling them problems, we call them opportunities. Opportunities to learn when mistakes are made, creates an environment for psychological safety. In her research, she looked at hospital settings and the degree to which people would identify errors. And those environments where there was psychological safety, they identified more errors. Well, that's because they felt comfortable being able to do that. And it's not to say that we're saying that you don't have to be excellent in what you do, but we are human. And so we should use these opportunities when things just don't go well as opportunities to learn. So that's one example. As well, I had mentioned earlier, I think maybe it was in our conversation, whereas if someone is giving you feedback, even if it's critical feedback, celebrate that. First of all, you do that with gratitude, but with their permission, you tell others. Say, Rhonda gave me some feedback. I really didn't want to hear it. I'm so glad she shared it with me. And I'm using this as an example to encourage others to do this because I need your feedback and I need to hear these different perspectives so that we can improve and do better. And I see a hand over there. We need another mic. You're good? All right, okay.
So you mentioned small changes that end up having really big impacts. Can you give an example of one of those that you've seen?
Sure, let's see, let's think about that. Well, I would say diversity is not a small change, it's a big change. But a small change could be just when I was talking about the classroom as a professor, just changing the way we engage with our students in terms of participation, what I mentioned earlier. That could make a big difference in terms of creating an environment of inclusion. Also, when issues are raised, to tell people that I've heard you. Even if you can't change the situation, just saying that I've heard you, this is important to me because it's important to you. Allow me to come back and give you an answer in terms of where we're going with that. Small change, big difference. When people feel that they're being heard, they will give you a pass when you make a mistake because they know that you are sincere about hearing their thoughts. Small change could make a very, very big difference. And if you have other suggestions around some of these questions too, please. I see this as a co-learning environment. Some of you may have some ideas or some experiences where you could say, this really worked, or this is what we're working on. Would love to hear that.
Hi, thanks.
Hey.
This is super interesting. So I'm an economist is my background,
Yes.
and it strikes me that like psychological safety could interact with the like subjective and objective criteria for promotion and merit raises. Like if the milestones are very clear, then you have sort of less weight attached to whether or not your colleagues like you and these kind of squishy factors. And I'm wondering if there's any research on this.
Yes, yes, yes. In my dissertation, I looked at reward systems, and I found that the more subjective the reward systems are, the less inclined people felt that they could be authentic because of the subjectivity involved in that. And that has me thinking about just promotions, and particularly when we're thinking about going up for tenure, that we have to be mindful of those of us who are academics in terms of the lens through which we evaluate our colleagues in terms of service, the type of research they conduct. Those are objective opinions that can have an impact on how we evaluate each other. Mm-hmm.
Hello, thank you so
Hi.
much for the talk, and it was amazing. It
Thank
definitely did light a lot of sparks.
Good. Thank you for telling me.
Of course. My name is Bela, and I am a graduate student here at University of Oregon. And coming from what you've been discussing and all the amazing questions here, I think a lot of us do sometimes find ourselves caught in between two terms. What is allowing diversity, and the other one is accepting diversity, which is sometimes I feel that those are two distinct terms. We do allow diversity, and sometimes it's more about checking the boxes. Like, we do see the representation of the 4 pillars there, but sometimes we're not really accepted, and diversity is not only pertinent to races, creed, religion. It's just like to every individual.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
well, whether that has to do with perceived importance itself, or rather the fact that even if we do feel that the diversity is being allowed with all sometimes the pillars, we still have to put up a facade sometimes because you know that you're not accepted.
Right.
So
Yes.
I guess what I'm trying to ask is, have you ever, like, how do we bridge the gap between acceptance of diversity versus allowing diversity? Things that go as simple as, yes, we have this whole bunch of students in University of Oregon, but yes, and they all have different dietary needs, whether that's religious, that's racial, that's whatever. But those are not represented in the cafeteria, and that cafeteria has been running for a while now. This is just one example. But every time people have had to apply for a leave, even though that is there, so just saying that there's one African American friend or one South Asian friend or one Asian friend that comes with a different background and everything is sometimes not enough, because we're allowing diversity. We're not really accepting them as different people with their own different backgrounds. Is there something, I mean, I guess, how do we bridge
That's
the gap?
the challenge. Yeah, that is the challenge. And what you're really speaking to is the inclusion part. So we bring in increased diversity, but then when we have it, are we all experiencing a sense of inclusion? And that, I think that really goes back to what I said earlier, and that we have in our minds what inclusion is and assume that it means the same thing for everyone, and it doesn't. And one of the solutions is to, I think you've had a climate survey. Did that include the students as well? No. All right, do you have surveys for students? I'm causing trouble, I know. All right, but just don't invite me again. Do we have, yeah, so one way is to make sure you complete the surveys, number one. Another way is to have conversations. Have conversations and ask students. So you're a student, so I'm really asking those who are in the positions to do this, to say, this is what does inclusion look like for you? What can we do to make this more of an inclusive environment? And then act, And if you're finding no one's asking, then you tell it. No one is asked, so we want to tell you what inclusion looks like for us. And we would like to see that. Why I'm here today is based upon students. Students said that they wanted something like this, and I congratulate those students. I know many of them probably have graduated and moved on by now, but we're benefiting from them. So if no one's asking, then this is your university too. Say something. And leaders, listen.
Thank you for your comments, by the way. That's great. Thank you for being here. I have a question about professionalism. I feel like professionalism is sometimes the opposite of authentic, and it seems to be rooted in a history of majority norms.
Yes.
And when we think about supporting our students to transitioning into the workplace, how do we help them navigate bringing their authentic selves and bringing their voice and inclusivity, and the norms that were really established by what does it look like to show up at work?
Yeah. Yes, you have to tell them the reality. To say that there are some contexts, I think we talked about this earlier, right? There are going to be some contexts that are going to require this, and this is what they reward as professionalism. But then the question is for you, in terms of your own value system, how does this coincide with any of your values? You may not be able to align all of your values, but are there some values that you can bring into that workplace which would allow you to thrive, even though you might not agree with everything as it connects to professionalism? This all has to do with if you're feeling like you're compromising yourself, that's probably not going to be the best environment. But it could be that you say, well, my value system around learning this particular skill and making a difference in this arena will override my other values in terms of whatever that might be. And so we are so multifaceted as individuals that we may not be able to bring it all in one place, But can we bring some that's acceptable without compromising who we are? That's really the introspection that's involved in really understanding this journey of authenticity.
I have a follow-up to that, I think, which is I work for the advancement division, which is a very customer service sales-focused division. So how do you walk that fine line of bringing authenticity to the workplace when your success is driven by clients or customers who don't share or might not share your organization's values or perceive that authenticity through their own biases and lenses?
Yeah, that's difficult. Yeah, frankly it is. And the fact is that there are some aspects of your job where you might not be able to bring in that level of authenticity that you want to bring in. But again, are you compromising your values? There's a difference between saying, I'm not going to say that, versus if I don't say this, I'm compromising myself and I'm living a lie. That's really what I'm talking about in terms of authenticity. You know, we can't, hey, if I had my choice, I'd wear pajamas right now. Wearing a dress, is that compromising my core values? No. But if I feel forced to suppress aspects about myself, my core, where when I walk out this room, I say, Patricia, that was a facade. That was a lie. That's the problem. And we don't want that for anyone. We don't want that for anyone. So hopefully that helps. Yeah, because we think that if we choose not to speak up about something that, we're not being authentic, oh my God, I'm a fake. No, you're being mindful of the context. You're being discerning, and that's okay.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you, Dr. Hewlin, for your talk, and thanks to everyone for being here. I work with young men. I help lead something called the Men's Resource Center.
I think I passed that.
It's just here.
Yeah.
Come by. But a big part of our work is around authenticity and about inspiring the sense of psychological safety through which our students, our young people can grow and develop and learn about where they want to get and or where they are in order to get where they want to get. One of the things I'm curious about is scalability, because while in some of these rooms, in some of these spaces, we try to create that safety and encourage the kind of authenticity that brings some of these challenges to the surface, a lot of my students might go back to their sort of regular context, whether it be among their friends or even down the hall to other folks at this university, and be punished for sort of that same kind of authenticity. And I'm wondering how you think about how to scale sort of these contexts across either organizations, ideally across society, but...
Sure. Well, first and foremost, when you receive that feedback and it's coming from this community, you need to raise that to the appropriate people. And I say that, for example, in my role as ombudsperson, once I start hearing trends, then I get on someone's calendar, the associate provost of student life, to say, there's a trend that's happening here. This needs to be addressed. And so the other thing is that I think it's great that they practice this in life. That's what needs to be done. And in the practice, they'll learn how to navigate these different environments, because we're not going to be able to change society. But we can have agency in terms of choosing where to go, what context we can be in so that we can thrive.
Hello, thank you again for the great talk. I'm a graduate student in chemistry, and being in that kind of department, that kind of physical sciences, I feel that sometimes we're quite insular with the way we think and kind of interact with each other. And I really like your point about reminding us that we're multifaceted. So how do we kind of stop being chemists and kind of being very scientifically data-driven for a hot second, and like had those hard, multifaceted discussions when it comes to all these pillars, when it comes to, like, you know, interpersonal and intrapersonal relationships?
How do you do it?
Yeah, like how do you
Just do it. Just hey, I want to go beyond the subject matter and talk about human dignity. Can we have a conversation about human dignity? And go for it. But are you talking about with your peers or with your profs or?
I mean, I think more in my case, a general, like as a department, like I have some of my peers are right here, and we're usually pretty easy to talk to, so it's great with them. I have a good cohort of friends.
Sure.
But I have a good PI I can talk to and relate to. But it's like, how do we have that discussion like as a department?
Yes.
So I feel like sometimes, for instance, our basement, people in the basement and people on the third floor don't talk to each other because distance.
Sure. Well, you can blame it on me. You can go talk to, I guess, your departmental chair and say, I went to this talk with Dr. Hewlin. Did you attend? I didn't see you there. Well, this is what but this is what she talked about. And I wanted to raise a few things. And then you put the blame on over here, Yvette. Put some blame on her and said, well, you know the vice president. You don't know the vice president? Yvette, Alex, I said, so. No? Well, you need to call her because she's the one who really is motivating me to have this conversation. So put the blame on someone else. So this way, you know, you can, if you feel more comfortable doing that, go for it. But yes, this is the moment. Clearly, this is a time of change. Your provost mentioned that. And so this is really a great time to spark these conversations. Go for it. Yes.
Yeah, about psychological safety, it's the perceived ability to engage. And the perception is very personal. Some people perceive highly, some people don't perceive at all. So how to identify and foster the most vulnerable member teams, the ones that really have a hard time with psychological safety, and how to foster that, how to help them.
Sure. Well, it depends on the role that you have as a colleague, or as a student, or as a leader. You can raise the notion of psychological safety in your meetings, in your informal conversations, to talk about, well, what does that mean for us? How well are we really learning from each other? To what degree do we really feel that we are being more innovative in what we do and trying new things out? Have those conversations with each other. Now, if you're someone who can actually influence this more in the structure of things, you hold a position to do this, talk about it and say how important it is for you as a leader, and how important it is for the team, for the department, for the college, whatever role that you play. Because there are benefits. One of the major benefits of having psychological safety in an organization is that the organization learns from the diverse perspectives. You want to learn so that you can get better. Oh, that's far. I beat you.
Thank you. You spoke about value breaches.
Yes.
And I wonder if you could share any examples about institutions or employers who have been able to successfully mend those kinds of breaches when they occur. I'm assuming that sometimes they're pretty severe, and so I'd be curious about how that could come out positively.
Yes, so then there is a study that I conducted with some co-authors in values-based organizations. And so when you're in a values-based organization where people are really highly espousing the values, when a leader makes a breach, the people are actually more forgiving. And we call that the blind eye effect. And so that's one thing to be, I know, right? It sounds like, oh my gosh, that's not good. But when you have a strong value system in place where people can rally around it, if the leader breaches a value, depending upon what it is, the leader will most likely be given a pass because people perceive the leader as holding those values. However, we found, of course, over time, if the leader continues, then there's a backlash, and the backlash is even stronger within values-based organizations. With that in mind, are you talking about leader value breach or just value breach in general? Own up to it. Own up to it. This is just a time, I would say, in society in general, where a cover-up was never good. But it's really not good now. You know, social media and everything else. You own up to it. You own up to it. And that might mean stepping down, depending upon what the breach actually is. But again, in values-based organizations, we find that there's more of a forgiveness associated with that. Not sure if I answered your question completely. Okay. Anyone else?
Excellent.
I don't know,
This is-
we've been racing.
If you could hold a second, this will help folks joining by live stream.
Since you brought up media, I figure I ask a media question. The access to so many videotaping devices and the access to making a mistake blow up into an atomic explosion, where reputations and careers can end in a microsecond, makes authenticity sometimes a third rail. And so have you done research around the effect of social media in relation to relational authenticity and or strategies for mitigating the role of social media? So
No, I haven't, but
one of the things I do in my classroom
Yes.
is that I do not allow any form of videotaping whatsoever or recording without, and it's in my syllabus, without the written approval of all the students,
Yes.
no one. However, that creates a conflict with accommodations. And I have to explain a lot how, because of the risk-taking learning environment that I'm trying to encourage, that any recording of someone being willing to take that risk can become, in this day and age, a weapon.
Yes.
And so, so it's a hard dance to learn.
Absolutely, yes. I would be interested in learning more about that type of research. I haven't looked into that, but yes, it's important, for sure.
Any last questions?
Yes. You double dipping?
I'm just curious about, and I've been trying to figure out how to ask the question, and I'm thinking back to how you said you're kind of tired of the term authentic. But do we risk, is there a place or a question around like toxic authenticity, like people that are asking to be accepted but causing harm?
Yes, yes. And so thank you for mentioning that. I'm tired of the looseness around authenticity, where people are not really recognizing the weight associated with being authentic for so many people. And so I don't like when it's used like, oh yeah, just be authentic. That I don't like, because being authentic could mean so much to some people, and because they can't or feel like they can't, just being authentic is offensive. So that's really where I'm going with it. It's when it sounds like, oh, it's just so easy to do. Go for it. All right, so number one. And then toxic authenticity, for sure, yeah. Being too much, where you're taking up space, where you are basically degrading others and just being offensive and saying, well, I was just speaking my mind. You told me to be authentic. There's no place for that. Because we want people to have a value system around respecting others. Now, with that in mind, our authenticity may rub some the wrong way because they're not accustomed to the way you're authentic. That's a different story. So, for example, if you're conflict averse and someone is being truthful and they have some energy behind that, receive their authenticity, learn, and be curious, versus shutting down. So it's a fine line, I know. But we have to really be careful with that because we're conflict averse. Many people have been brought up in families where they fuss. And they're passionate about that. And then all of a sudden, the angry black woman, she's so angry. It's like, I'm not angry, I'm just passionate. Yeah, but you offended someone with your anger. It's like, I wasn't angry. And then I'm playing this out because this happens. This happens, I've heard this story. And then it plays out, and then as the black woman is defending herself, then it's like, oh gosh, she's impossible. And please don't let anybody cry. Seriously, we know these things happen. So I want to be truthful to everyone. This is very serious to me. And I'm passionate about seeing change. So we have to really evaluate the lens through which we react to, interpret the authenticity of others, especially those who don't look like us and are from different backgrounds. And there is no place for toxic authenticity, and I think we're all smart enough to know what that is. Thank you for raising that. Okay, you want more?
I think we're at time.
All right.
I want to, on behalf of the Division of Equity and Inclusion, thank you all for being with us here this Monday evening and joining and making the African American Workshop and Lecture Series the amazing set of series it is. It's about bringing people together and having these amazing conversations, so thank you for being here. And thank you, Dr. Hewlin, for the gift of your time. You have flown across the country and spent a day in meetings and then ended with a very long event. So thank you, and will everyone just join me in a big hand for our guests. Thank you.